A mother's heart-wrenching choice to leave her infant son on a wealthy family's doorstep sets the stage for a decade-long journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption. As Leo grows up in a world of privilege, his birth mother Amara battles poverty and relentless odds to one day reunite with him. But when a custody battle pits love against stability, secrets unravel, and the stakes become heartbreakingly personal. Will a mother's love be enough to bridge the years of separation? And how will Leo react when he discovers a hidden person that changes everything? The rain lashed against the windows of the tiny, crumbling apartment, its relentless drumming masking the quiet sobs of Amara as she cradled her infant son, Leo. Her hands trembled as she pressed her lips to his forehead, his soft brown skin warm against her cold, calloused fingers. She had nothing left, not even a bottle of milk to soothe his cries. The eviction notice, smeared by her tears, lay crumpled on the floor. Outside, the city streets were alive with chaos. The storm had turned the narrow alleys into rivers of mud, and the distant hum of police sirens added to the cacophony. Amara had seen her neighbors, families like hers, dragged from their homes that afternoon. Their faces haunted her. "Shh, my love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's going to be okay." But it wasn't going to be okay. Not here, not with her. She had spent weeks searching for work, knocking on every door and pleading for scraps of dignity. The factory had no openings, the diner wouldn't hire a single mother, and the shelter had room only for her, not for a crying baby. Hunger gnawed at her, not just in her stomach but in her heart, a hollow ache of helplessness. She paced the room, clutching Leo tightly, her bare feet splashing through the puddles that had pooled on the warped wooden floor. The decision had been forming in her mind for days, but now it felt unbearable, like ripping apart her own soul. She had overheard the grocer talk about the Harringtons, the family in the grand house at the end of Whitmore Avenue. "They've got so much they don't even know what to do with it," he had said, chuckling as he bagged oranges for a customer. That night, under the cover of the storm, she wrapped Leo in her only clean blanket and grabbed the photograph she had kept of the two of them, her fragile link to him, should the world conspire to erase her from his life. She stepped out into the rain, her body shivering as the cold seeped through her thin sweater. The streets were empty, save for the occasional rumble of a passing car. When she reached the Harrington estate, its wrought iron gates looming like the walls of a fortress, she hesitated. The grand house stood illuminated against the dark, its windows glowing with a warmth that felt foreign to her. She placed her palm on the gate, the cold metal biting her skin. Her eyes darted to Leo, his tiny hand clutching the blanket. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice choked. "I'll come back for you, I promise." She hurried to the doorstep, her feet slipping on the wet stone. With trembling hands, she laid Leo down, ensuring he was wrapped tightly. A sound escaped her lips, a guttural cry, before she kissed his forehead for the last time. She knocked, her knuckles scraping the wood, then turned and ran, her legs carrying her far away from the warmth of the house and into the shadows of the storm. Inside the Harrington home, a soft murmur broke through the clatter of the rain. Esther, the maid, heard it first. She paused, setting down the silver tray she was polishing, and moved toward the sound. Her heart leapt when she opened the door to find the crying infant, his wide, dark eyes staring up at her. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, calling for the family. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington emerged from the sitting room, their faces etched with shock and confusion. Esther held the baby in her arms, shielding him from the cold draft of the open door. "Someone left him here," she said, her voice trembling. "Poor thing. We can't just leave him." Mrs. Harrington, a stern woman with sharp features, crossed her arms. "This isn't our responsibility, Esther. Call the authorities." But something flickered in Mr. Harrington's eyes as he looked at the boy. A softness, perhaps. "Let's not be hasty, Ruth," he said. "Not tonight. We'll figure it out in the morning." Esther retreated to the warmth of the kitchen, holding Leo close, her instincts overpowering protocol. She fed him a few drops of warm milk and hummed a lullaby, her heart aching for the mother who must have been desperate enough to abandon her child in such a storm. Back in her darkened apartment, Amara collapsed onto the floor, rainwater pooling beneath her. Her arms felt like lead, empty and purposeless without Leo. Her sobs filled the silence as she clutched the photograph to her chest. "I'll come back," she repeated to herself, her voice hollow. "I'll come back." The storm outside raged on, the wind howling as if to drown her cries. Amara didn't move until the morning light crept through the cracks in the boarded-up window, casting its pale, unforgiving glow over her broken world. Leo's soft coos punctuated the quiet breakfast table at the Harrington home the next morning. Emily, the family's 10-year-old daughter, watched him with curiosity. She reached out to tickle his tiny hand, and he grasped her finger tightly. "Can we keep him, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes wide. Mrs. Harrington shot her husband a warning glance, but Mr. Harrington sighed. "Let's see what the authorities say," he replied. Yet, in his heart, he already knew the answer. Something about the boy had shifted the axis of his world. Outside, in the shadows of the Harrington estate, Amara stood unseen, her face pressed against the cold iron bars. She watched as her son, her Leo, smiled for the first time in days, cradled in the arms of another. And in her heart, a vow solidified like steel. She would do whatever it took to return for him, to reclaim him, to be the mother he deserved. But first, she had to survive. The years passed, and life on either side of the Harrington estate's gates painted starkly different pictures. Inside the grand house, Leo grew under the glow of wealth and privilege, his presence transforming the household in ways no one could have anticipated. Outside, in the shadows of the bustling city, Amara toiled through relentless hardship, every breath fueled by her promise to return for her son. Leo's first steps were taken in the Harringtons' expansive garden, under the watchful eye of Esther and a beaming Emily. The boy's laugh rang out, pure and bright, as Emily twirled him in circles. The garden became his playground and her haven, their bond deepening with each passing day. By the time Leo turned 5, he had become Emily's little shadow, following her everywhere, his small hand clutching hers tightly. "Do you think I'll grow up to be as smart as you?" Leo asked her one afternoon as they sat beneath the sprawling oak tree. "You'll be smarter," Emily replied with a grin, ruffling his curls, "and probably taller." Their laughter echoed through the estate, a stark contrast to the life Amara lived beyond its wall. Amara's days began before dawn, the cold light of the early morning guiding her to her first job cleaning office building. Her hands were raw and blistered from scrubbing floors, but she never let herself rest. By midday, she would rush to her second job at a garment factory, the hum of sewing machines drowning out her thoughts. Nights were spent at a diner, washing dishes until her body ached and her vision blurred. Her savings grew painfully slowly, each coin and crumpled bill tucked into an old coffee can she hid beneath her mattress. Every time she added to it, she allowed herself a fleeting thought of Leo. What did his voice sound like now? Did he still have the same dimpled smile? Was he happy? Her only solace came in the brief moments she stole outside the Harrington estate. Hidden among the hedges, she watched Leo play in the garden. She had no right to speak to him, no claim to his life, but seeing him filled her with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. One rainy evening, her resolve wavered. She clutched the wrought iron gate, the cold biting into her palms, and whispered, "Leo, it's me, Mama." But the wind carried her voice away, and she turned back toward the darkness before anyone could see her. Inside the Harrington home, Leo's world was one of opportunity and learning. He thrived in school, excelling in his studies and charming everyone with his natural curiosity. Mr. Harrington had grown proud of the boy, though he rarely admitted it aloud. Mrs. Harrington, despite her initial reservations, found herself drawn to Leo's earnestness. Only Esther seemed to suspect the shadows lingering over his past. Emily, however, harbored no doubts. To her, Leo was her brother, as much a part of the family as anyone else. "Why do I look different from you and Mom and Dad?" Leo asked her one evening as they sat on the floor of her room, building a model airplane. Emily hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-assembly. "It's because you're special," she said carefully. "Not everyone comes from the same place, but that doesn't mean we're not family." Leo seemed satisfied with her answer, but the question planted a seed of curiosity that would only grow with time. Amara's tenuous peace was shattered when she overheard a conversation at the diner one night. Two patrons, regulars she had come to recognize, were discussing a prominent family in the city planning to relocate abroad. "The Harringtons?" one of them said. "Yeah, moving to London soon. Something about expanding the business." The words sent a jolt through Amara's chest. Her breath came in sharp gasps as panic gripped her. Moving? To another country? They would take Leo so far away that even the faint connection she clung to would be severed. She wouldn't be able to watch him from afar, wouldn't know where he was or how he was growing. The thought was unbearable. That night, Amara sat by the dim light of her single bulb, staring at her meager savings. She had planned to wait until she had enough to provide a stable home for Leo, but now time was her enemy. If she didn't act, she might lose him forever. The next morning, Amara stood outside the Harrington estate, clutching the photograph she had taken that fateful night. Her hands trembled as she approached the door, the enormity of what she was about to do threatening to overwhelm her. She hadn't seen Leo up close in years, but the time for caution had passed. When Esther answered the door, her eyes widened in recognition. "You're his mother," she whispered. Amara nodded, her voice trembling. "I am. Please, I just want to see him." Esther hesitated, torn between duty and compassion. Before she could respond, Mr. Harrington appeared, his face hardening as he took in the sight of Amara. "Leave," he said curtly. "You have no right to disrupt his life." "I'm his mother," Amara's voice cracked. "You can't keep him from me. We've raised him," Mr. Harrington shot back. "He doesn't even know you exist." Tears streamed down Amara's face as she clutched the photograph tighter. "I gave him up because I couldn't provide for him, but I'm his mother. He deserves to know me." The commotion brought Mrs. Harrington and Emily to the foyer. Emily's eyes darted between Amara and her parents, her confusion evident. "Who is she?" Emily asked. "She's no one," Mrs. Harrington replied quickly. But Leo had followed the voices, his small frame appearing at the top of the staircase. He stared at Amara, his young mind trying to piece together the truth he had never been told. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara's heart shattered at his words, but she steadied herself. "I'm your mother, Leo," she said softly. "I came back for you." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the sound of Leo's shallow breaths. The boy turned to Emily, his anchor in a suddenly shifting world. "Is she telling the truth?" Emily's face crumpled, her lips trembling as she nodded. "I think she is." That night, as the storm clouds gathered once again, the Harrington family and Amara prepared for a battle neither side wanted to fight. Amara's love burned bright, but her years of struggle had left her with little to offer but her heart. The Harringtons, armed with wealth and influence, were determined to protect the life they had built for Leo. For Leo, the storm outside was nothing compared to the turmoil within. His world had been cracked open, and he wasn't sure how to put the pieces back together. And for Amara, the fight for her son had only just begun. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Amara stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched her lawyer's arm for strength, her fingers trembling. The polished wood and the austere atmosphere made her feel small, but her determination burned bright. This was her chance to reclaim Leo, to tell the world that she had never stopped loving him. At the other table sat the Harringtons, their wealth and confidence evident in their tailored suits and composed expressions. They looked at Amara as if she were an intruder, a threat to their carefully crafted lives. Leo sat between them, his young face pale and strained, his eyes darting nervously between the two worlds that demanded his loyalty. The days leading up to the custody battle had been a whirlwind of conflict and heartbreak. Amara had been denied access to Leo after her initial confrontation, the Harringtons insisting it was for his own good. Desperate, she had turned to a local legal aid center, where a young lawyer named Maya had taken her case. Maya's passion was fueled by her own memories of a mother who had fought to keep her family together against impossible odds. "They'll use everything they have to paint you as unfit," Maya had warned Amara during one of their late-night meetings. "But we'll fight back. We'll show them that love and sacrifice matter more than money." Still, Amara knew the odds were stacked against her. The Harringtons had hired the best legal team in the city, determined to keep Leo. Their argument was clear. They had raised him, provided him with stability, and given him opportunities that Amara never could. In court, the Harringtons' lawyer stood first, presenting a polished argument about the importance of continuity and stability in a child's life. "Leo has thrived in the care of Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," he said. "Disrupting that now would cause unnecessary harm." The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, turned to Amara. "Do you understand the implications of removing Leo from his current home?" she asked. Amara rose slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "I gave him up because I couldn't provide for him then. But I've worked every day since to make sure I could. I didn't abandon him. I chose the only way to give him a chance at life when I had nothing." She held up the photograph she had kept for years, the edges worn and faded. "I've never stopped loving him. I've never stopped being his mother." The courtroom fell silent as Amara's words hung in the air. Even the Harringtons seemed momentarily shaken, their confidence wavering. Outside the courtroom, the media had caught wind of the story, their cameras flashing as Amara and the Harringtons entered and exited each day. Leo's face, confused and frightened, became a symbol of the emotional toll the battle had taken on everyone involved. Inside, the tension escalated. The Harringtons accused Amara of being reckless and irresponsible, citing her years of poverty and struggles. Maya countered with testimonies from neighbors and co-workers who spoke of Amara's resilience, her unwavering love, and the sacrifices she had made. But the most devastating blow came when Leo was called to testify. Seated in the witness box, his small frame looked even smaller under the weight of the courtroom's gaze. His voice wavered as he answered the questions, his words heartbreaking in their simplicity. "I love my family," he said, glancing at the Harringtons. "They've taken care of me, but I don't know why my real mom left me." Amara's heart broke anew at his words. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to meet his eyes, but Leo couldn't look at her. As the days dragged on, Amara's hope wavered. She lay awake at night in the small apartment she had rented near the courthouse, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the trial in her mind. Maya's optimism buoyed her, but the weight of the Harringtons' resources and influence felt insurmountable. Meanwhile, Leo wrestled with his own turmoil. Late at night, he sat in his room at the Harrington estate, staring at the photograph of the woman who claimed to be his mother. Emily sat beside him, her usually bright demeanor subdued. "What if she really loves me?" Leo asked, his voice breaking. "She does," Emily said softly. "You can see it in her eye." "But why did she leave me?" he whispered. "Sometimes people do hard things because they have no choice," Emily replied. "She gave you up so you could have the life you deserve. Maybe she's trying to come back because she thinks she can give it to you now." The final day of the trial was grueling. Both sides presented their closing arguments, each filled with raw emotion. Amara's voice trembled as she spoke directly to the judge. "I can't undo the past," she said, "but I can promise Leo a future filled with love, understanding, and everything I have to give. Isn't that what a mother's love is supposed to be?" The judge's face remained unreadable as she adjourned the court to deliberate. That evening, as Amara walked back to her apartment, the weight of the trial pressed down on her. The streets were quiet, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows. Her resolve, so fierce at the start, now felt fragile. The idea of losing Leo forever was a pain she could hardly bear. In the distance, she spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench in the small park near her building. It was Emily, clutching the same photograph Amara had left with Leo. "He didn't want me to come," Emily said softly as Amara approached. "But I think you deserve this." She handed the photograph back to Amara. The edges were worn from Leo's small hands holding it. "Thank you," Amara whispered, her voice breaking. Emily hesitated, then added, "No matter what happens, he needs you to fight for him. He's scared, but he's also curious. He doesn't know what it all means yet, but one day he will." Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I won't stop fighting." As Emily walked away, Amara held the photograph close, the storm within her calming for the first time in days. She had reached her lowest point, but the glimmer of hope Emily had offered reignited her strength. Tomorrow would bring the judge's decision, and with it, the resolution of a fight that had tested the limits of love, sacrifice, and resilience. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, her expression grave and unreadable. Amara stood with Maya at her side, her hands trembling. Across the room, the Harringtons sat rigid, their confidence tinged with tension. Leo, seated beside Emily, clutched her hand tightly, his wide eyes darting between the adults in his life. "After careful deliberation," the judge began, her voice steady, "I have come to a decision." Amara held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She clung to the photograph in her hand as if it were a lifeline. The court acknowledges Amara's deep love and sacrifices for her son, as well as the Harringtons' dedication and ability to provide for him. However, given the circumstances and the evidence presented, I find it is in the best interest of the child to remain in the care of the Harrington family. The words hit Amara like a blow. Her knees buckled, and Maya's arm shot out to steady her. Across the room, Mrs. Harrington exhaled audibly, relief washing over her face. Leo's head drooped, his small shoulders hunched under the weight of the verdict. "But," the judge continued, her voice softening, "it is the court's decision that Amara be granted regular visitation rights to her son, effective immediately. While the child's home will remain with the Harringtons, his connection to his biological mother is vital for his emotional well-being." The room buzzed with murmurs. Amara blinked, struggling to absorb the words. It wasn't the victory she had dreamed of, but it was something, a bridge to her son, a lifeline to hope. Later that evening, the rain returned, its soft patter mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Amara stood outside the Harrington estate, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked on her way. The gate creaked open, and Esther emerged, her face kind but cautious. "They're expecting you," she said, motioning toward the house. Amara's steps faltered as she approached the door. When it opened, Leo stood there, his face a mix of curiosity and apprehension. His small frame seemed both familiar and foreign, and the sight of him stirred a tidal wave of emotion within her. "Hi, Leo," she said softly, her voice trembling. "It's me. I'm Amara." Leo looked up at Emily, who stood behind him, nodding encouragingly. Slowly, he stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the flowers in her hand. "Are those for me?" Amara nodded, a tentative smile breaking through her tears. "I thought you might like them." He took the bouquet, his small fingers brushing hers. For a moment, they stood in silence, the world shrinking to just the two of them. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question pierced Amara's heart, but she knelt to his level, her hands resting on her knees. "Because I loved you," she said, her voice cracking. "Because I wanted you to have a chance at a life I couldn't give you. And I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second." Leo's lip quivered and tears welled in his eyes. Emily placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "She's telling the truth." Slowly, Leo stepped into Amara's open arms, his small body trembling as he clung to her. "I missed you," he whispered, his tears soaking her sweater. Amara held him tightly, her own tears falling freely. "I missed you too, so much." Weeks turned into months, and the arrangement grew easier with time. Amara visited Leo regularly, their bond slowly strengthening as they rebuilt their relationship. Emily often joined their outings, bridging the gap between the two worlds. But life had one more twist in store. One rainy evening, Amara arrived at the Harrington estate with a young girl in tow. Ella, her shy, wide-eyed 4-year-old daughter, clutched her mother's hand tightly. Her curls bounced as she walked, her resemblance to Amara unmistakable. Leo opened the door, his face lighting up when he saw his mother, but his eyes widened in surprise when he noticed Ella. "Who's this?" he asked, stepping closer. Amara knelt, her hand gently stroking Ella's hair. "This is your sister," she said, her voice trembling. "Ella!" Leo's gaze shifted between them, his emotions swirling. Finally, he knelt before Ella, a tentative smile breaking across his face. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Leo." Ella looked up at Amara, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, she reached out her tiny hand, and Leo took it, his fingers curling around hers. "Why didn't you tell me about her?" he asked Amara, his voice tinged with hurt. Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Because I couldn't bear to lose you both," she admitted. "I was trying to protect her the way I thought I was protecting you." Leo hesitated, then wrapped his arms around his sister, pulling her close. "I'll protect her now," he said, his voice steady. Years later, Amara stood at the door of her modest home, now repaired and filled with warmth. A black car pulled into the driveway, and she held her breath as the door opened. A tall, confident young man stepped out, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the simple surrounding. "Leo?" she whispered, her hands trembling. He smiled, his eyes glistening. "Hi, Mom!" Amara rushed forward, enveloping him in a tight embrace. Ella, now a young woman, joined them, her laughter mixing with their tears. Leo kissed his mother's forehead and said, "I've built the life you wanted for me. Now it's my turn to take care of you and Ella." If this touching story moved you, please subscribe to HeroKind Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. What moment touched your heart the most? Your feedback inspires us to bring you more stories of resilience, love, and triumph.